and welcome to episode 118 of the PowerScore LSAT podcast. I'm Dave Killorn in beautiful Napa Valley, California.
I'm Jon in Los Angeles.
Not beautiful Los Angeles?
No superlatives, no adjectives, just Los Angeles.
Just sprawling Los Angeles, smoggy Los Angeles.
Hot down here today. Steamy Los Angeles.
Steamy. Well, hopefully that's not, in line with what this episode is.
You don't want this to get a little steamy, Dave?
No, I really don't.
That's out of character.
Yeah, let's keep it straight on topic. So, Jon, it's an afternoon episode, which is rare for us, but that's because you've got a Hollywood engagement later today.
That's one way to put it. I am going to see like a premiere thing tonight. So, yeah, we're doing this early, which is why I'm only drinking an Americano. Kind of by the book, keeping it PC and under control.
Nothing inside that? No rum?
No. I suspect we'll get into something tonight. So
I hope so. Well, on my behalf, I'm drinking, again, my favorite energy drink, the Monster Energy Zero Ultra. This time the Sunrise flavor, which is orange, which is one of my true favorites. It's got to be first or second.
If we don't have a sponsorship by episode 150, I say we storm their building.
Why do we have to wait that long? Why? We need to talk to marketing and be like, why are you guys not jumping on this? I need free cases of this stuff showing up at my house every week.
To be fair, you turned me on to it. It is pretty good. So, Monster, if you're listening, compliments from both of us.
It's glorious. Sponsor us. And I've also chosen the song here, Jon.
You did. You got some music in your future. I'm seeing movies and you're seeing bands.
I do. This is probably our most selected band for this podcast. And it is the Struts out of England. And I'm going to see them actually in Sacramento in about a week and a half at the Aftershock Festival. They are playing along with a couple of their bands I like Muse. So they got a new single out called Fallen With Me. It's a great song. I've been listening to it on repeat. If you haven't heard it, I definitely recommend going and listening to it because it is awesome.
Yeah, a lot of times we pick these things based on like thematic relevance, title of the episode or the feelings that it kind of creates. But this is just a good song.
It's a good song. I like the fact that I can promote a band that I know is great and should be much, much larger in terms of their fan base than they actually are. Every time I see them, they blow the doors off. They will be great, even though festivals are not really my favorite venue for seeing the bands that are smaller. There's just so many people. It's daytime. I'd rather see them at night in a club, but this will work. I'd rather see them than not, so I'll take it.
There you go. I hope they stay small.
Yeah, I don't know. I have mixed feelings about that. I remember seeing Muse when they were playing clubs, and now they're playing worldwide stadium tours and headlining the final day of Aftershock, so that'll be interesting.
Cool.
I've seen them at festivals before, and it's a pretty good show to see.
I've seen them with you at festivals before, and yeah, they kill it.
Yes, indeed. That would have been Bottle Rock a couple years ago, pre-pandemic.
Yeah, that's the one.
Fun times.
I know. Well, while we're talking numbers and dates and things, let's get into the LSAT world.
Yeah.
A few quick bits of just errata here, I guess, or scattered data. The first thing, for anyone listening to this, if you took the September test and did all the things you're supposed to, which is to say you completed your writing sample, your test didn't get flagged, you will be listening to this after scores have come out. Scores come out Wednesday, the 28th. We're recording this on Tuesday, the 27th. So as of this going live, people should have their scores.
And I hope it's good news. If it's not, and that's why you're listening to us, I'm sorry on your behalf, because that's not what we want. We want to see top scores for every score release. But if you have issues or problems or questions, we're always around to help.
Yeah. There are 2 tests left this year. The first of those is October. It starts on the 14th, which is a Friday, and then runs into Saturday the 15th with a few test administrations the week to follow, mostly for accommodated people. The deadline to register for that has passed. The score release for that is going to be November 2nd, so 11/2. There is also a November test, and that'll wrap up the 2022 calendar year. It's November 11th and 12th, Friday and Saturday, again with Tuesday tests that come the week after for accommodations. The registration deadline for that has not passed. It ends this Thursday night at midnight Eastern, the 29th of September. So if you are listening to this with scores in hand and feeling you're going to need to retake, November is your next option to do so.
Indeed. In fact, one of the questions we have in this mailbag issue relates to taking that November test and the deadlines and how early or late it is. So we'll come back and talk a little bit more about November shortly.
That score will release at the very end of November, the 30th. And then much like this September score release gives you a chance to register for November, the November score release on the 30th still gives you a chance to register for January, the first test of next year. That deadline is December 2nd.
Indeed it is. And then how's the applicant trend looking in terms of like the size of these various tests that we have?
Well, as of now, October is a pretty big one. One of the largest, if not the largest of the year at this point. Almost 26,000 people registered for October. That number is going to continue to drop. We've already seen it bleeding off. Once people get their September scores, a lot of the October registrants are going to pull out because they won't need to retake. We hope that's you, frankly, if you're signed up for October but waiting. And then some people are going to push that October test into November, and they still have a few days to do so. So I think that number is going to actually change a lot this week. But as of now, about 26,000 people in October. November's still got a ways to go, and it's actually going to jump this week. Right now, it's just under 15,000 people signed up.
Yeah, the big question here is how much does October come down? Almost 26,000. Does it drop below 20,000? I don't think so, because usually a test like October has a little more staying power because people need it for applications, whereas a test like June, they could drop out and feel like I can take a later test. That happens less with October.
Yeah.
For understandable reasons.
I'll tell you, if 20 is the line, 20,000 is the line, I think I'd take the under.
I hate to say that I likely would too. I guess we'll have to see. That it's going to be close, but if it follows any of the trends from previous tests, it would drop under 20,000. I think it's going to be in that vicinity though, and I don't think it would drop below 19. That would surprise me. So I think there'll be a little more staying power in October. So I imagine that I would set the bar higher than you, but not by a huge amount. The flip side of that is how much does November jump up?
Yeah.
As you said, it's just under 15. We know it's going to rise this week. There's not a huge amount of time for it still to rise. So it's not going to be 25,000 or 30,000 test takers. It's not going to double overnight. So the best question there is how much does it jump up? And the reason that might matter to you, if you're like, who cares, is these are your fellow competitors in seeking spots in law school. So you never operate entirely in a bubble. Everything you do certainly is within your control and is not affected by other people, like the LSAT score that you get, your GPA, your extracurriculars. But the truth of the matter is that the number of spots in law school doesn't vary tremendously from year to year. So the number of competitors that you have can have a really big impact on what the law schools do and how difficult it is to actually get in. So this is why we track this stuff.
Yeah, I'm glad you bring that up because there's additional data here that we don't fully have yet, which is why I don't think we should try to even attempt it today. But that's looking at like a year-to-year overall comparison. We're still waiting for some LSAC info to come out, I think.
Yeah, we are. We'll have that within a month or so, not within the month, but within a month, we'll know that. And people have been asking me about the comparison from the early cycle, from this cycle to last one, and whether we're seeing a drop. Is it the same? And it's really hard to tell right now. It looks like it's going to be slightly under, but we'll have to see because these final weeks make a huge difference in where things come in.
Yeah. So plan to hear us discuss that in a future episode. For now, we'll table it.
Indeed. So what's up with the webinars? Because we always talk about those as well.
Yeah, I got a bunch of good free ones coming up. We're one day late on recording this for the webinar tonight. So if you're listening to this and didn't make the one yesterday evening, that's a shame. But the next ones that are available, there's one on October 11th on templates in logic games, limited solution sets. I love that one. You created a wicked game in that I still go back and like to teach people. I bring that into classes and tutoring sessions sometimes.
It's also a cool song by Chris Isaac, Wicked Game.
Wicked Game. There you go. Fair enough. I think we've got our next episode tuned. But that's a really, really great webinar. If you can make that on October 11th, I encourage you to. There's one on my birthday, October 26th, which is logical reasoning, parallel reasoning. So arguably the most time-consuming question type, certainly one of the more challenging. We show you how to break those down with a bunch of good examples. And then to just kind of keep it mostly current, on November 9th, there's a reading comp one on comparative reading, comparative passages. So really between October 11th and November 9th, you can get a flavor of all three section types.
You sure can. And that one that's on your birthday, I know you're not going to teach it.
No, because I am teaching lesson 10 of my class that night.
And then thereafter going out, I hope.
I think I'm actually taking a red eye down to Mexico that night. So
Okay.
I suppose going out. Yeah.
Are you going to Mexico City? What's the plan?
Waxahachie or something. I'm butchering that. But
I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Though.
So if anybody can phonetically piece that together, that's where I'll be for a few days, and then Mexico City for a couple of days. I'm meeting some
You gotta
friends.
improve your Spanish, man.
Oh, God.
You like Mexico. You go down there quite a bit.
I do. This is the Dia del
Spanish.
Muerto or whatever that they have for
great festival.
Mexican Halloween. So I'll be there for my birthday and for that.
Love that.
Yeah.
That's a great celebration. Really interesting. I didn't realize that's what your plan was. So
Yeah,
go have a good
that's
time.
the plan. The game will be, did he paint his face to look that way, or is that just how he looks?
Interestingly enough, following up on webinars that we're doing for free. Again, if you want to sign up for any of those, go to powerscore.com/free seminars, and you can sign up there. If you're on a mobile, you might have to scroll over a little bit to the right to hit submit, but it is there. And we just did our biggest webinar of the year, which we do on a regular basis, and that is the crystal ball. We did it for both the October and November LSATs. That was a big session, one of the largest that we've ever done. Well, I'm not sure it was the largest, but it was up there. And there was an interesting problem that we ran into. We had a small technical issue because of the capacity of the room was kind of off a little bit. And so some people had difficulty at times getting into the session. And we're never ones to just sit back and say that's, problems are fine. So one of the things we did immediately thereafter was we made that webinar available to the public. So anybody who ran into a delay, if you missed any portion of it, if you couldn't get into the room, or maybe if you just missed it entirely, even if you weren't registered, it's now available for free. You can go to our website, powerscore.com. /LSAT and use the form there, and they will send you a link to that webinar. And it is the full webinar that we talked about that night. It lists out all the problem sets that we use, the test predictions. So you can go ahead and access that. And that's kind of like our little, our fall gift is what we'll say.
Yeah, our rocky road here actually, I think, turned in some real benefits for people. Two quick disclaimers on that. One, check your spam folder or junk email folder. If you go fill that form out, I know a lot of people's email things were grabbing the link. If you still don't have it, shoot an email to our support staff at lsat@powerscore.com, and they'll be able to send it to you through that.
Yeah, just for the record, if you were registered for that webinar, and thousands of people were, that was the amazing thing. I think you and I were both like, wow. We sent you that link automatically and explained, hey, if there was a little issue, we want to make sure that you have it. The beautiful thing is the audio on that is clean and locally recorded. Jon and I both do that during the webinars. So it is as good as it's going to get in terms of look and sound. So you should have that if you registered. If you hadn't registered, this gives you the opportunity to catch it after the fact. They're not going to leave that form up forever, though. So I would recommend doing the sign up and using the form pretty quickly if you want to get that, just as a reference.
Yeah. So for the first time in quite a while, this is available to non-PowerScore students. Please take advantage. And pay particular attention to the recommended problem sets and the details we give about like section features, section trends. We talk a lot about what's happening very specifically in each of the 3 section types. Very useful as you study. Helps you prioritize too, where to rank things or the hierarchy of importance.
Indeed. And we also added a few new features, as we always do with these. So it's never the same as it was before. Everything changes. We try to give different looks at what we're doing, keep it interesting for us, and also keep it informative for everyone else. And perhaps not surprisingly, that crystal ball features to some extent prominently in the episode that we're doing today. We're taking a number of student questions. And one of the things that we have historically done at the end of those crystal ball webinars is we have done a Q&A where I will just sit on the mic and take live questions for a while. I'm not sure we're going to be doing that so much going forward because it gets a little bit unwieldy and it's a long night, to be honest with you. But I will say this, that we had so many great questions, and a number of them I really wanted to be able to expand on a little bit more. and it just not really able to do that in that format. So we're going to bring some of those back for this particular mailbag episode and go into more detail on a few of the ones that we felt were really very important or really broadly appealing in terms of the discussion. So on that note, let's roll into the questions we've got set up here, Jon.
Cool. I like it. And that was a really nice segue. Well done.
Thank you.
So not all of these are going to come from the crystal ball. Several will. This first one, to me, is just a frequent question that I'm getting in basically every arena where I visit. I see this on Twitter and Reddit. I certainly get my students asking me a lot about this. I know, Dave, you get hit with this all the time, which has to do with the future of the test and test prep and whether we're ever going to see a day where it goes back to some kind of like in-person regularity. Is the LSAT ever going to be administered in person again?
Yeah, and let's isolate that first, because the second half of this deals with our classes.
Yeah, we should do this.
And we'll hit that afterwards. Do I think the LSAT will ever be in person again? For some people, yes. I think they're going to probably eventually decide that they need to make this available in some way, shape, or form to people in person. But I also think that the online option is so attractive to them and, cost efficient in many respects that I don't think they're going to drop this. So I think they will probably at some point allow students to go to a test center or, a limited number of locations and say, all right, we'll add those in-person options, whereas the vast majority of people will still take it online. Some people just don't really like the technological aspect of the interface and how it works. They don't like certain things about it. And if you really have that objection, I think they're going to make some kind of workaround available for people. Is that official? No. There's no word from LSAC on this. I'm just using logic to kind of figure out that even though they haven't talked about it, it would make some sense for them to consider that option. They're trying to make the greatest number of people happy.
Yeah.
They know that some people are very unhappy with the online format. So maybe why not allow a safety valve that releases that pressure?
Yeah. While you're speculating, any guesstimates on when that might actually begin to happen?
Not in 2022.
That's a good bet.
The easiest answer in the world. I could see it happening, by summer of 2023. The pandemic, I think, threw them into kind of a situation where so much was uncertain to them. And at this point, you still see a number of pandemic-related precautions in place. So I think they're being careful. But you also have, the government saying, oh, the pandemic's over, and people certainly acting in many instances as if it is. I mean, I'm going to a huge music festival, and I've been one of the most careful people out there. So these types of things, I think that people are returning to a degree of normalcy, and even if they unfortunately get sick, they're accepting the fact that, well, that's just the way that it is.
Yeah.
So I think now that they feel like that certainty is becoming more and more locked in, and they don't have to deal with as much uncertainty, I think they'll start to really consider that. But I don't think they'll do anything prior to, say, the summertime or the early fall of next year. That would be my theory. Maybe June they would test it out. But again, there's no official word on that. That's just speculation.
Let's talk about something we can be a little more official about, which is what our plans are, PowerScore. Because I get to ask this question a lot from people too, and from a lot of our instructors and tutors who I know, and I'm one of them, frankly, miss being able to stand in a room of people and see those sea of smiling faces. The good old days when you could actually hang out and teach a class live in person.
And go have a drink afterwards.
Typically so.
Yeah. There's nothing official on this front yet, but the day is coming. We've been very cautious overall, and we did that because we really felt it was important to protect students. But at universities across this country, they are in class, and we'll be returning to class relatively soon here. And we'll start off at the big cities. I don't know that our coverage will be the same as it was before the pandemic. We had classes in all sorts of sizes of cities across this country and in Canada as well. And I'm not sure we'll have as many class locations, in part because so many people are now, so comfortable with the idea of being online, and there's so many advantages to delivering classes online that, like the replay aspect. You can't replay a live class where you're in person, but you can replay a live online course. I think that we'll do it, but we'll probably keep it a limited set of options. So you'll probably see those start to populate our website in the next couple of months. But I would imagine that in 2023, we'll have a relatively full slate of classes in places like New York and Los Angeles and so forth.
We've been running the occasional in-person class in Manhattan already.
Yeah.
Again, with the utmost discretion and care.
Yeah, we had those earlier this year, and then there was a COVID resurgence, and I think we got 80% of the way through the classes and had to shift them back online. And that's what we're trying to avoid, is that jumping back and forth. I love in-person classes. We got a great location in a place like New York City. We have our own office space and classroom space there. We want to use it. We've just been really abundantly cautious about the whole process, and I don't feel bad about that. I feel good.
Perfect. All right. Well, let's move on. This is a question from the crystal ball that I think you probably saw. I see this a lot, and I'm happy to say I've worked with enough students who actually fit this particular question subject matter that I can speak with some authority on it. I know you can as well. The question is, what are paper accommodations like? How do they work? How do you qualify?
I have to say, Jon, I did not see this question, but that was because there were so many questions.
It may have come when you were on the mic for the second half.
Yeah.
Because I remember typing a response to it, which means I wouldn't have been talking at that point.
Yeah, and it's really hard when you're talking and actually kind of going through content to then be like, oh, I'm reading the chat as well. It's very distracting. So I didn't see that, but there were so many questions and so many people there that it was really hard to follow the chat in general. But let's talk about that accommodations process, because not everyone is aware of just the basic parameters of it. So I'll address that, and then I'll let you talk a little bit more about the paper testing accommodations. Okay. But LSAC has a full-blown accommodations process where if you need some kind of consideration that alters your testing circumstance, you can apply for it. And this can cover all sorts of different things. It can cover situations where you need more testing time, or maybe where you need to move around more frequently. Maybe you need to interact with the test differently instead of being online to have something in paper, which, by the way, is a reason that they might want to have in-person testing so that someone can come take an accommodated test and they can actually serve that student as well as possible. But there's a wide variety of reasons why people actually need accommodations. And so there's a formalized process that's built around this. In fact, the LSAC website has all this information very clearly laid out. And you apply by submitting paperwork. Big surprise. It's a bureaucracy. They want more paperwork. And usually what you need is an explanation of what you're asking for, details, all that personal information that nobody likes to give to a corporation. And then you also need some type of medical backing and support, a doctor of some sort to come in and say, look, this is why this is needed. This is what I'm recommending. Then it goes to LSAC for review. And in the past, LSAC was really variable about this. Some people who probably should have gotten accommodations were denied. Then there was a bunch of lawsuits over it. And in recent years, it's actually been a lot smoother of a process. I see people complaining now, like, they say it's going to be 12 days and I didn't get it in 12 days. And I was like, man, I remember when it was 8 weeks to get a response. Yeah. Things have gotten so much better. And of course, the Department of Justice helped with that. They have a big stick and they slammed it down. So it has really changed the process. And now if you have a medical justification, by and large, you get accommodations. Now, you may not get exactly the accommodation you ask for. They might actually change it slightly because they have their own doctors review this and make recommendations as well. But if there's a good reason for you to have, say, double time on a test, you'll get it. If there's a good reason for you to have extended breaks so you can get up and move around, maybe some kind of physical related situation, you'll go ahead and get it. Sometimes test takers have the ability to stop their test at any point and move around. There's a ton of accommodations and a list much longer than I can detail here. We did actually an episode a long time ago on the podcast about getting accommodations. And that's the episode that I would refer people to actually kind of go through this and learn a little bit more about the process. One of the accommodations, though, is to take the test in a paper and pencil format, the way the LSAT was administered for years and years prior to 2019 or so. And so that's the second part. That was the specific question that was asked here. Jon, what's the paper and pencil accommodation like?
Yeah, their biggest concern with this is when they release a test, a hard copy test out into the wild, is obviously test security, making sure that the test doesn't get out of proper hands, but also that someone who gets sent a copy of the test isn't able to preview it or share it or do anything with it before they're supposed to. So the security features of this, I think, are probably the most interesting part of the process. And here's what happens. LSAC will send you a box, very thoroughly sealed box that contains your test. You typically get it either the night before or sometimes even the morning of, depending on when you schedule your test time. So they cut it pretty close by design. They don't want you sitting with this box for a week.
Because idle hands make the devil's work, and people want to get into it.
Yeah. Can you imagine staring at your LSAT over in the corner for 4 days? The temptation is too strong. So you get it on camera. They have you open it. So proctor's watching you. It's being filmed. You open it. And inside, the individual sections of your test are sealed in little packets as well. So you take section 1 out, which again is just sort of anonymously sealed up. You won't know what it is. Again, on camera, you open up this packet, you take out the paper form for that section, and you work on it. And before you move on to the next section, you put it back into like a bag, basically, reseal it on camera and put it back in the box. So it's a section by section, little Fort Knox moments as you go through. But it's very deliberate. It's very well regulated and controlled. But yeah, that's the way that it actually works. And then you send it back in the post. It goes off to LSAC, and they treat it like everything else. You wait for your score.
Yeah, and you're usually taking that. Many of the paper and pencil test takers are on Tuesday.
That's usually when
after
the
after the main administration. But one of the questions we often get is it harder?
Yeah, that's funny. I was about to say that.
Yeah, it is not. It's just another LSAT. In fact, we can typically go back in our archives and see which LSAT it was that they have administered, which is super helpful for us because then we're just tracking those uses. It's part of how we make predictions in the crystal ball. It's how we do podcast recaps where we talk about this kind of stuff. It's just another LSAT. Mm-hmm. That's true for the paper and pencil test, any accommodated test. It's true for the international test.
The makeup
they're
exams.
Not trying to make makeup exams. They're not trying to make special LSATs for those events that are harder or easier. They're just like, get another one off the shelf. We got to fill this slot.
Yeah. In fact, typically these days, the paper and pencil test is just one of the combination of forms that we've seen over the weekend. That's how it was here in September. It's also why we can't release a podcast on Monday after a Friday, Saturday test administration. They make us wait until the paper people are done because they're going to see some of that same content, potentially.
They want us to wait, and we've agreed to do so.
Yes, that's a diplomatic way to put it.
They can't make us do anything.
Okay, that's true.
However, we can be reasonable about it, and we'll continue to be reasonable.
And we would, frankly, be in the moral wrong if we were to release something that could help a paper person beforehand. So we're conscious that even if they told us, look, cuffs are off, do as you please, we would still wait.
I'm not sure that the moral wrong has always been on our personal minds, John. But in terms of like doing what's right here, it most assuredly is a very important process and thought for us. It would be unfair. Some people would have an advantage in that paper and pencil environment by having heard that podcast and, been acquainted with some of the topics that they might see. We don't think that's fair. We're not going to give anyone that type of advantage. And so that's why we don't release the podcast until Wednesday at the earliest or Thursday usually.
Yeah. We do make different decisions after dark. I'll give you that.
Now that I'm married, my decisions are far, far better. When I wasn't, they were bad.
Fair enough.
Anyway, let's go on to the next question and get off that topic because that goes nowhere good.
That's right. This is an interesting one that arose from a situation last week where there was a little bit of a tech issue, just a blip in a class with an instructor who's a good friend of ours. And he texted or called us both really and was like, guys, can you help out while I get this sorted? So I jumped into his class for a few minutes and had a conversation with his students while he worked out his microphone. And I basically just opened it up just off the cuff and riffed a Q&A with him. I was like, guys, ask me some questions. They asked a lot of good ones, one of which was about LSAT writing, which I think even to this day, people have some misconceptions about or misunderstandings. And this question very generically was like, what's the deal with LSAT writing? Forced myself not to do a Seinfeld voice. And then anything I should be worried about, and do schools even care? Because you hear this a lot, that schools don't even pay attention to it.
Yeah. So
I ran through for the group essentially how LSAT writing works. For those who don't know, It's no longer a part of the actual LSAT test experience. It's done separately. You can do it before your test. You can do it right after. You can do it months after. Although for reasons you'll hear, don't do that. The key to LSAT writing is this. You have to have a completed writing sample, approved writing sample on your record before they will give you an LSAT score. They're good for 5 years. You only have to do it once. But if you don't have a writing on your record, they won't release your scores. And it's true for anyone listening to this, hoping they get a score for September. If you haven't done the writing, they're going to hold on to it until you do. So that to me is the important part of the essay. Is it basically just, it's the final key, essentially, to unlock the door to your score.
It's a necessary condition to receive your score. You got to have one.
Well done. That's right.
I mean, it's just in LSAT terms, it's a really obvious relationship.
That's
so
perfectly said. It's a 35-minute essay. It's really pretty simple. It's not scored. It's not graded. There's no such thing as like the best writing sample ever. Certainly you can do poorly on it if your prose is bad, your English is bad, or you just don't try. But for the most part, it's pretty straightforward. And we've done an entire podcast episode on how to approach the writing in terms of like the form and function. I'll spare you that. Anything to be worried about? Yeah, ultimately, you should be worried about doing something that violates the rules and gets it flagged. Anything that would stop its approval, that you should worry about. So we hear people sometimes who have like a smartwatch on when they do it. The latest rule and prohibition is that you can no longer use scratch paper when you write the essay. There is space on the essay where you can type notes and type an outline if you want, but scratch paper is no longer allowed for this. So again, be careful.
So let's address 2 points there. The first one is this, if you do flag yourself accidentally by wearing a smartwatch or having a backpack open behind you while you're doing it, the consequences are not that dire. It's a loss of time and effort. You have to go do it again, but you're not sent to, law school admissions jail and accused of some kind of moral violation. We don't want to have one of those, where you all of a sudden can't apply to law school or you're, permanently on report. It's just, hey, you made a mistake and please redo it. And part of the reason for that is that nobody's worried about the content of the writing sample. It is not prejudicial in terms of the application. So that's the first thing. The second thing, Jon, is the scratch paper prohibition is relatively recent, and I can only describe it as what? Who cares? Yeah. Why are you prohibiting scratch paper during the writing sample? This is the most ridiculous thing I've heard yet, where I think to myself, that's where we're drawing the line, is on extra scratch paper during the writing sample. If you were to say that there was some kind of tight regulation of scratch paper on the actual LSAT,
right,
I could understand that, and I would understand exactly why, and it would make sense. On the writing sample, why are we wasting our time? Or really, why is LSAC wasting our time?
Yeah, if I understand your question correctly, and it's a good one, why are the rules for the writing sample stricter than for the test itself?
There you go. One must wonder what new thing is coming in the writing sample that is going to be top secret, ultra special.
I don't even have a guess, but the key here is just knowing the rules, because like you say, it's a huge time waste if it gets flagged, and it could delay your score release. It takes them at least a few days typically to approve samples. I saw comments just yesterday, Monday, about the release tomorrow, Wednesday, about like, I just did my writing sample, is 48 hours enough? And the only honest answer to that is maybe.
Maybe. Possibly yes, possibly no. In the old days, they had a real backlog while they got this up. And by the way, in my most speculative fever dream, it's hard to imagine what they could possibly be doing with this and why. It could be completely meaningless, or who knows, maybe the future ends in a scored writing sample. And, they're locking down the security now for something like that. Again, that's not official. That's me speculating entirely. Really wildly. And so just take that with the largest grain of salt that you can find.
I like it. You're full of imagination today, Dave.
All of a sudden, I've been struck by, I guess that Zero Ultra Sunrise is working right now because I'm starting to feel more energetic.
Your creative juice is flowing.
A little bit spicier in terms of that particular question. I'm like, really? I've always thought this is like,
it's silly. Which actually leads to the last part of the question, which is, how do schools treat it? Do schools even care? I think is how it was asked.
Yes.
Short answer is they don't really care, but there can be situations or scenarios where they would give it more scrutiny. So the first thing to know is just, look, do a good job. It's probably not going to get you into law school. But it could be the sort of thing that's a red flag if you clearly have blown it off, or if you've written such a poorly constructed essay that they begin to essentially doubt your fluency. That's the sort of thing you don't want to give anyone reason to doubt or suspect. Where they might scrutinize this a little bit more would be specific cases like ESL students, English as a second language, so international applicants. If there are other parts of your application, maybe that are essays, let's say, that look as though they're a little bit dodgily constructed in terms of like fluency or eloquence, articulation. Or one of my favorite ones that would have actually applied to my college roommate, if you just have terrible undergraduate English grades. I've heard admissions people say that if we see your college transcripts and there's something about it that makes us think you were poor in English, we might read your essays, especially the timed one, because you can't get help with it.
And that's actually not an unreasonable thought on their part, because so much of the law is about reading and writing. If there's any suspicion over the qualifications that you have as a writer, they're going to examine it more clearly, because being a lawyer is writing a ton. Certainly it's reading a ton, but it's also writing a ton. And the ability to express yourself with a degree of grace and eloquence is extremely important to this profession. So they're going to look closely at it in those types of situations. Beyond that, I mean, if they're seeing somebody who is coming in, you start looking at these schools in the upper echelon, like the T14 schools. They're getting a number of applicants with high grades, high LSAT results, and they're thinking to themselves, by and large, look, we can see you're already a pretty good student. You've got really good credentials. We're now looking for other things besides that writing sample. And typically it's one person who's reading your folder, and certainly it's one person initially, barring further consideration. And each person has like a different feeling. Maybe there's like, maybe I do want to read this one, or maybe I want to explore this. You never know when they're going to read it and when they're not going to read it. Is it a huge part of the process? No. But what I consider it to be is a trap. Is that as you approach it, you don't want to fall into a trap where someone reads it and says, that's not good, and that's just another negative, and knocks you out of the running. A writing sample is not going to get you into a law school, but in certain cases, you could see it keeping you out, especially if they're like, international student, let's just double check this. Wait a second, this is markedly different than the personal statement that was written here. You're out. So it's a trap. It's not a benefit to you. It is a check box for the school. You just want to make sure that you've checked it. Like, that seems pretty good to me. That's solid. And nobody cares what you choose either, by the way. There's no right answer to this. Right. Nobody comes out of the writing sample thinking, at least from an admission standpoint, I can't believe they made that choice. That's the worst choice ever.
I got it right. It's not how this works.
All of these have gray areas. There's good and bad to each of the options that you have to go through.
You mentioned an aspect of this that's comparative, though, or potentially comparative. And I do want to talk on this really quickly, because this is one of the parts of your application that is done in real time on your own, with no additional help or editing, no software even really to help you out with this, much less like a consultant, let's say. So if you have concerns that your writing sample is going to essentially indicate a level of ability grossly different than what your personal statement looks like, or the essays where maybe you've had a lot of coaching and help, that's a red flag to schools as well, frankly.
Yeah, maybe go do another one if you feel like you didn't really put in your best performance. Is that largely needed, for the majority of people? No. It's not. But if someone goes out and is like, I didn't feel well and I didn't do a good job, well, then go redo it.
Yeah.
If you feel like if you feel like it could be a negative on your application and you have the ability to turn it into something reasonable, do that.
Yeah.
Because there's no harm in it.
Yeah. My point, I guess, of concern would be this like glaring discrepancy between here's what this person sounds like when they write on their own, here's what the submitted essays look like. And then it almost feels like you've had a ghostwriter for your personal statement.
Yeah. That would be that rare occasion where they're looking at a situation where they're like, we're a little suspicious of what we're reading. Let's do a double check. This is hard to fake in real time. And then they might think that's a discrepant situation that does not make us comfortable. It doesn't take much to knock you to the bottom of the pile in terms of, admission priority.
It's funny, when we started talking about this, my thought was like, you can kind of blow it off. It's mostly just a box to check. But the more we talk about it, the more I'm starting to get the sense of like, actually, this is really worth doing correctly and doing well.
if you're a good writer or you read a lot and you're comfortable with writing, you'll be fine. It's nothing for you to worry about. It's the individuals who don't fall into that group who need to be more concerned about this and who need to really have a clear game plan on what they want to do and try to execute it. To me, it's always about clarity of thought. It's not about the length of the essay. Writing more words isn't going to help you in this situation. It is about how clear your thought is, how you develop your position, the nature of the argument, not the specific argument, but the nature of it. Are you granting points to the other side, but playing up the strengths of your own side, those types of things? What good writers do, and what really, most importantly, good arguers do. And that's what you're looking to do, is come off as somebody who's like, oh, this person's thoughtful, they're putting it together. I don't even know what they're writing about, perhaps. They might not even read what the topic is or what the decision is. They're just reading the way you wrote about it and thinking, does this person reason well? Do they express themselves well? That's the goal.
Yeah, I always think about it in terms of how organized you are with the structure that you intend to apply to it. Because this is a very structured situation, almost a template that you can use to create it. We don't need to get into the details of how to do it. We've done that.
We're not going to.
Yeah.
We did a whole podcast on that.
We've done that.
Go find that one. Let's move along to another crystal ball question. And Jon, you did a really interesting thing. This was a suggestion that we made during the crystal ball where you talked about supersetting LR. And so if you don't know what we're talking about there, first off, go back and watch the crystal ball, sign up for it, get it for free. And watch the section on logical reasoning, because we made some recommendations on various things to do, types of questions to look at, and so forth. And this came up in there. You called it supersetting logical reasoning, and you said, if you want to make your life more challenging, geez, who doesn't? Take the second half of two separate logical reasoning sections and put them together as one. Typically, the second half contains a greater number of hard or higher difficulty degree questions. So having two of those is like a super difficult set. And so that's what you were recommending, which I think is a fun idea, especially if you're a higher level scorer. You really want to push yourself. That's the maximum. That's like the Ironman triathlon of doing LR. Trademark to Ironman, I'm sure. And so you take that particular point. But Jon, then you got a follow-up question about it. Is like, wait, could that hurt me?
Yeah, it's like the guy in the on-deck circle with the weighted donut on his bat taking practice swings. That's kind of what this feels like. So that when you actually step to the plate with a regular bat, step to the LSAT with a regular section of logical reasoning, it doesn't feel nearly so heavy. You can go faster, you can swing harder. You're overtrained, basically. But the question I got, it caught me a little off guard, but I thought it was interesting the more I thought about it, which was, is there any chance that focusing almost exclusively on like above average difficulty questions is going to somehow prejudice me or even hurt me when I see easier than average questions in the first half of real sections? And on the one hand, I can actually see the concern. I can see the legitimacy of this, because if this were to say, shape your expectations so that everything you see, you think is going to be hard and super tricky, and that anything that appeals to you as a right answer is probably a trap, like it might be in question 19, and you think that about question 2, you're doing yourself, I think, a disservice, frankly. Earlier questions in logical reasoning, right answers tend to look right. The danger happens in late questions where right answers are almost certainly disguised and wrong answers tend to be more appealing. So I think as long as you understand that there is this difference, this juxtaposition, and that you use this superset idea less about setting the tonality of what you expect through the section and more about thinking of process, because that's what this is about. What am I going to do to insulate myself against any kind of difficulty or any kind of danger? What am I going to do to still feel as comfortable as I can in places that are engineered to make me uncomfortable? If that's what you take out of this, and it makes you a little more conscientious, a little more like, again, process-driven and focused on the steps, the strategies, there is no downside to this.
Yeah, and I'm going to take a tack that goes along that last part. If you're doing sections of questions, superset it up that you know are extra hard, what it does is it makes you more vigilant. It makes you more analytical and more careful. I don't think that's a bad thing, because some of the questions that are so-called easy that people miss, really easier, they're still hard, it's because they failed to apply that degree of analysis. And this is exactly where people try to say, well, the early questions are easier, so I'm going to relax on them. No, there's no relaxing during the LSAT. You're putting 100% effort into every single question. That's how you get them all right. Hopefully that is your ultimate goal. Even if you don't reach it, the goal should be to get every single question right. And so that extra hypervigilance, the reason I love that so much is because now you're applying it to every question. Will you see a question that you think to yourself, that's too obvious to be right? Yeah, people do that all the time. And in fact, they will avoid choosing that answer because they're like, it's too obvious. No, some LSAT answers are in fact very obvious. So there's nothing wrong with being trained to be more vigilant. And also what it does as well is there's a physical component to concentrating in that fashion for that long. It is hard to do it over the course of a section where your attention does not waver. It requires training. Supersetting like this puts you at an even higher bar. So when you go back, just like that weighted donut on a baseball bat, it feels less difficult. It feels like, well, I've done this before. It's like running marathons to train for a 10K. The experience is a little bit different, but you can start to realize, hey, my levels of fatigue in this 10K aren't nearly what they would be in a marathon. Not a perfect analogy, but it works for what we're talking about. So yes, sometimes people will be like, well, I'll start to think easy questions aren't easy. You do that anyway. I've seen really good students and middle of the road students have that same exact problem. I just didn't think it could be that easy. Sometimes it is. So I don't see a downside to this.
Yeah, again, as long as you're conscientious about where you are in a real section, then I think you can use basically like the incredulity that this tends to build into people, the skepticism and the scrutiny that this demands. You can build that into the first 10 questions too, but with the expectation that it's going to just reward you differently. The feeling that you're going to have about answer choices is going to be a little different.
Yeah, doing more and harder questions will not hurt you.
Yeah. Probably could have just led with that. But yes.
Why do we have this discussion? Like you just said that and been like, the answer is no, you'll be fine.
I wonder that sometimes in these. Do you think people just prefer a one-word answer? Yes.
No, they would not.
It does lead, it leads to the next question really perfectly, though. Like the tie-in between these two is great. Because there was a question I got on Reddit, and this is one I'll actually read in full because I thought it was a nice message, which said, I hope it's not out of line to message you directly. This was to me. But I see you and Dave on here helping people all the time, so I thought I'd give it a shot. Any advice on dealing with test fatigue? I can feel my focus fading in section 4 and tend to perform the worst there, no matter the section type. Thanks so much for all you guys do.
That's kind.
Nice message. You're very welcome. And there's nothing wrong with messaging us in places where we're active. So, yeah.
Not on Saturday night.
Fair enough, but so far so good. This didn't cross any lines in my book.
I have a tendency to respond relatively quickly to most messages, so I don't want to get them on Saturday night.
Yeah, fair enough. So in thinking about this idea of test fatigue, or somewhere around like section 4, this person was just like, my attention basically begins to wane or drift. My focus, I just not nearly as sharp. I can feel my body begin to protest, which is what I hear from a lot of people. So what do you do best you can so that come test day, you don't actually experience that?
Well, I mean, first off, recognize that it's going to happen. It happens to everybody. So that is part and parcel of the test taking experience. Knowing that you're in the same boat as everyone else can be comforting. The second thing is it actually really goes with the perfect point that I made about like marathons and 10Ks. It really dovetails with that perfectly, is to prepare for it. Practice is critical to this. And so you're going to have to do, first off, some full section tests. You're going to have to do like the full 4 section with the experimental tests and kind of go through it. If you really want to kind of help yourself in terms of dealing with fatigue, go back and create those older 5 section tests. Back when the LSAT used to have 2 LR, a reading comp and a logic games, plus another experimental section of one of those 3 types. That's 5 sections. That overdrives you. You do 5 sections and you're like, I am dead. That's what the LSAT used to be. That used to be normal for it. We used to give out practice tests all the time that had 5 section tests. And so that's still something that is incredibly useful. You do that and then you go back to a 4 section test and it's like, wow, the weight got lifted because that last 35 minutes is no longer there. You're done after section 4.
Yeah.
So what I would say is use tools like that. Practice, focus, understand that it's going to be there. Overdrive some of your test taking so that you actually know what it is like to go beyond the limits of 4 sections.
Yeah, in the old 5-section days, we would often tell people to do 6-section tests. Do
Yep.
3 sections back to back to back, take a break, do 3 more back to back to back. Because again, if you can get yourself to a place where that feels survivable, then 5 sections feels almost abrupt, or certainly at least not nearly as demanding. I used to do this
Abbreviated.
5-section test with no break, where I would just do all 5 sections in a row. Don't give yourself a minute's rest throughout, just to get myself to a place where I'm like, if I can live through that, if I can succeed with that, then I want test day to essentially feel like a little bit of a breather. You can relax into it a little bit.
Yeah, and 6-section tests back in those days was terrible. Was
Back
hell.
in any days. Yeah.
Just so long, but it made the 5-section experience feel lighter. It wasn't as much of a burden. It was like you remove the final hill from a long race. It's the same thing now. We don't have 5 sections on the regular LSAT. We only have 4 sections on the regular LSAT. So now we would overdrive it with that 5th section, but it has the same exact effect on people, is that it actually doesn't feel as burdensome. So prepare for it, practice for it. That is the easiest way to deal with test fatigue, because you know that it's going to happen.
Yeah, and one last point that I'll make to it is this takes time. Endurance is essentially like a physical, almost muscular thing, whether it's mental or physical endurance. It takes a while to build it up. You're not just going to do 5 sections tomorrow and be like, okay, got that done. In the same way that athletes train over time, in the same way that people trying to train for a marathon or a 10K, or people trying to get in shape in the first place. You don't go to the gym once and come out with a 6-pack. It takes a little while to get where you're going to go. So make this a gradual process, trying to build up, and then over what you need. And then you can scale it back and feel like you're comfortable.
I think on that note, we'll close that line of questioning down.
Cool.
Let's go to another question that we got from the crystal ball, question that I like to, pile on to. And Jon, that question is November too late of an LSAT to take in order to be competitive in this or really any cycle? And what about January? Is that too late?
This is one I almost am really tempted to just do the one-word answer. Because the short answer to this, which we have said repeatedly and stand by, is no. November is not too late in this cycle to be competitive. January is not too late in this cycle to be competitive. Now, there are footnotes on that. Of course, school deadlines matter, where you're trying to apply, what your scores look like in terms of the delay versus an earlier application. But short answer, November to me is mid-cycle here. January to me is sort of the 60th percentile somewhere in the cycle. Those are rough estimates, but I don't see either of those tests as prohibitively late.
No, and I would divide this discussion into 2 kind of broad areas. The first is all applicants, and then the second is, let's say T14, maybe T20, T25 applicants. So the top 25 law schools or so. What you say about the overall applicant pool is 100% the case. Anything where you're applying prior to that kind of like winter break, Christmas, that holiday zone is on the first half of the cycle.
Mm-hmm.
And what we've seen in the last couple of years is that admission cycles have been slower. Meaning if there was any urgency to apply early, say 3 or 4 years ago, that urgency has really gone down because schools have taken a lot more time making decisions because they've had to be more careful. Some of these cycles have been really rough. They're slowly getting better, but they're not all of a sudden back to normal yet. And so we continue to think that this upcoming cycle is going to be on the slower side, which means that applying in September or October, as nice as it is, if you can do it, is not an absolute requirement. It's nice, but it is not determinative. The way I always look at this from a general application standpoint is it better to apply at the very beginning of the cycle with an application that isn't as good as it could be, or later with a better application? And the answer to me is always later with a better application. They're not tracking the day you applied. They're not like, they don't get down to a decision among 2 applicants who are really similar and say, you know what, this person applied on October 8th. This other person didn't apply until December 3rd. Unbelievable. December, they're out. That's not how this works. Mm-hmm. They're not going to look at that. It's just not something where it's hugely important to them. There's so many other factors that actually have an import into what is occurring. So when you start getting into the top law schools, one of the questions and comments that is made is, well, wait a second, if I don't apply early, all the money might be gone. That's not the case either. We have seen multiple instances in the last several years, the toughest cycles in history, where people applied in January or early February and got the money that they needed. So I understand the idea of rolling admissions and the theory that, hey, applying earlier gives you some slight advantages because you're being determined earlier. A lot of that's been turned on its head in the last couple of years. Mm-hmm. And as long as you're applying before the deadline, that's obviously key, it's not going to be determinative. The big question we've often got is, I can apply on day 1 with this LSAT score or day 90 with an LSAT score that's like 1 or 2 points higher. Which should I take? I'm like, higher score?
Yeah.
Numbers make it different. So I'm not trying to dunk on this question, but we get it a lot. I feel really strongly about this. I've talked to a number of admissions deans about it. I've talked to other experts in this field who've helped students, and we all agree, hey, November is in no way, shape, or form too late for any applicant at any law school from Yale, Stanford, Harvard on down.
Well said, well covered. Let me put a final bow on this as it applies to the situation, to anyone listening to this right now, because there's a certain timeliness about the November test, given when we're recording. If you just got your September score back, or you're looking at October, maybe you're signed up for that, you're on the fence about November, but you still have now about a day and a half to sign up for it. If you feel like you can improve your score even a point or two by November, take the November test.
Yeah, it's a fact.
You still have time to sign up. It's still this calendar year. It is not late in the cycle. An extra point or two makes it worth it.
Your application date is not the number they track. Your LSAT score is the number they track and is probably the most important thing in your entire application folder. Which do you think is the one you should focus on?
Should turn that into fridge magnets and send them out with the books. So true.
Keep it simple in this particular case. It's so easy to overthink this process sometimes and really kind of get into that. This kind of plays into the next question too, because part of that question was about, like, is January too late? And January is not too late either. But somebody had asked during the crystal ball, well, look, I know I'm going to take a later LSAT. I'm either going to, I think they were thinking more like they were going to take the January LSAT due to scheduling, but they have their application ready right now. Should they just put their application in? And again, we can divide this into two kind of avenues. The first is do you already have an LSAT score on record? And the other is if you don't have an LSAT score on record. So I'll address both of them. If you don't have an LSAT score on record and you put your application in, it just sits there. Mm-hmm. And again, they don't care what date you applied, so it doesn't do anything. They take no action. They just put a checklist on it and say, hey, we have all this information. We don't have an LSAT score. They won't look at your application until it's complete. They don't look at partial applications. Some people are like, well, they can see I'm coming. I'm like, no, they can't, because they don't even look at it because they don't know if you're ever going to complete your application and they don't have time to waste. Yeah. So applications are not considered until it goes final, and to go final, you must have every single component checked off. So if you haven't taken the LSAT yet, there is no reason for you to rush it. In fact, take some time to make sure that it really is as perfect as you think it is. Yeah. So that's one, avenue there. The other branch in this tree is, what if you already have an LSAT score, but you know that it's not good enough or that you know you can do better? Well, first off, if you know you're going to retake the LSAT and you apply right now, law schools pull a report from LSAC that shows them who is registered for the test. And if you've applied to their school, they will put those two things together and the school will automatically see you have another LSAT score coming. And typically, it's not universal, but typically they will immediately shelve you and put you on hold and wait for that score to come in. Why do they do that? Pretty simple. If you're a mid-range school and your scores look pretty good for that school, or even if they're a little bit under, they're worried that you might go out there, post a score that's 10 points higher, and move right into another level of law schools. They don't want to have that happen. They don't want to admit you and then have that happen because that's a bad thing for them. So what's the safest thing for the law school to do? Stop and wait. Mm-hmm. Totally logical in terms of how they act. Law schools are not stupid. They're not just like, wow, you look like a good applicant, we're accepting you. They are savvy. They are looking at their numbers. and they are trying to piece together the best possible class on all levels: numbers, traits, backgrounds, abilities, experiences. And so they're not going to just rush into something. And in the cases where they have in the past, I'm sure they've had enough lessons where they're like, we're not going to do that anymore. So if you know you're going to be taking the LSAT again, you want to make sure you have your application in prior to the deadline so that you're good. But usually if you have another LSAT coming up, as soon as the law schools see that, they stop any analysis of you because they want to wait and see what happens. That is often the case, even if you write them a note and say, hey, look at me anyway. Mm-hmm. Even if you're at your local state school and you're like, this is my most extreme safety, I just want to get in, they might yield protect you because they're like, you don't really want to go here. Your numbers are going to be better. We're not going to, admit you just so you feel better. We're trying to admit you so we think you're going to go here. So you don't get any advantage there. So it is okay to do that. Just realize that you won't get a decision typically, even if you ask them for one.
Yeah. Again, some relevance to the people who are going to take October and November or who are signed up for it. Even if you get this September score back today and schools see it, if you're still a work in progress, basically, in their eyes, there's no reason for them to make any final judgments about you. So they don't.
Yep. Until they have everything and they know that they're done, what's the big deal? Now, if you're in the springtime and it's March or April and you think, I'm going to take an LSAT for scholarship reconsideration purposes or to get in off a wait list, then it's a little bit different. Then you're already getting decisions back. You're trying to, change your status there. If a school hasn't made a decision, they might further wait, but it won't change any decisions you received at that point. So the calculus on this changes from the fall to the spring as decisions start to come out. That changes how things work. This is, John, part of the reason we do admissions consulting.
Yeah.
Is because each situation is different. I love talking to students about this and kind of like game planning on how are we going to deal with this? What do we need to do? What are the possibilities out there? Jay Donnell, who was with us the other night in our crystal ball, he and I talk about this kind of stuff all the time because it's one of the most intricate but also fascinating and really unknown parts of how to play this process appropriately to maximize not only your admissions results, but the money that each of those schools offers you as well.
Yeah, fascinating is the word I would use as well. It's particularly fascinating, still get a cold shudder from it, watching at the end of a crystal ball where you open up the Q&A to 1,000 people in the room and get 1,000 different admissions questions about everybody's unique situation. And you handle it with grace and elegance, of course. But it just goes to show at that point, it's so individualized that it almost demands some type of bespoke approach.
It really does. Let's move on from that because that's really about LSAT time. Let's talk about some questions that are also admissions as well. A little bit about extracurricular and law school choices and so forth. So I'll start off with this question. All right. Which I think, was sent to you in an email. I'm not entirely sure. Might have come up in the crystal ball as well. But it says, is it worth joining a pre-law group or society at my university? Does joining the pre-law society make any difference in your apps? And I thought this was an interesting question because on the surface of it, it seems like, oh, that's an easy answer. But when you really think about what's being asked here, it goes a little bit deeper. The easy answer is sure, it can't hurt you. But I would say that a lot of times when people think about extracurriculars, especially if you don't have a lot, the very first thing that people start to think to themselves is, I need to join everything and bulk that resume up. So I'm going to become a pre-law society member. Then I'm going to join the cosplay society. Then I'm going to join the book librarians club. They're going to join all these different kind of things. And they'll be like, look how I've used my time. And so, joining the pre-law society just in a bubble is a nice thing. There's people who have similar interests. You can help study for the LSAT, talk about schools. But on a certain level, though, does it matter? No. It doesn't matter if it's the pre-law society or the future treasurer society or whatever society is floating around out there. And that is because when law schools look at extracurriculars, what they're looking for is a dedicated interest in specific areas. Doesn't matter what that interest is. It could be legally related. It could be about music. It could be about conserving water and natural resources. They want to look at somebody who says, look at that. They're really into this and they're almost like an evangelist for this particular idea. They're
Passion.
somebody with passion, real deep interest, a breadth of interest. So if that's you and law and being in the pre-law society matches up with that, that's great. That actually, says, hey, this person's really heading in this direction. However, if the pre-law society is just one of a multitude of grab bag, disparate activities that you're involved in, it will not make any difference whatsoever because it doesn't show that thematically you have a passion. So when you're thinking about extracurriculars, especially if you're younger, just starting college or you're a sophomore, don't think about joining everything. Think about joining things that are connected to each other. I think about this when I was applying out of high school into college. It's clear that I'm pretty much, very much into music, and a lot of the activities that I was involved in were musically related. I didn't do it on purpose, but I got lucky because later on, it looked like I had this whole set of interest and I was willing to participate in the community around music. And that was true. So it wasn't a lie. It was just I didn't do it with intentionality. I did it accidentally. But that's how it works when you're working through this now with extracurriculars.
I was thinking how brave it was of you to mention your own extracurriculars, like the cosplay thing and the library club. Civil War reenactments.
When I played the college.
Don't ask him which side.
I love cosplay because it's such a cool thing that people can participate in that way, but then that did not exist when I played.
It was just funny to me that those are what came to mind for you when you were
just coming up
examples.
With
Yeah. But knowing that you were actually like playing in bands and doing shows and stuff. To me, when I hear this question, I always think like, is it worth joining a pre-law group? Yes, but let's talk about why. Let's talk about where the worth comes from. It's probably not going to change some admissions decision necessarily, but there's a tremendous amount of personal benefit that I think you get from this. A lot of what you're going to find in law school and beyond is just the networking within this sort of professional field, really.
For sure.
This is a good entree to that, I think. Anytime somebody's on the fence about doing like a PAD membership or some kind of pre-law, I always tell them to go for it. Get involved. It's nice too. I mean, this test it can really beat you up mentally, psychologically, emotionally. So having a support group in place, knowing they're going through the same things and maybe can offer some solace or even advice to get you through it, that's a really helpful thing too.
Mm-hmm. Like-minded people.
That's exactly right. Or just, misery loves company sometimes. This will give you that. Where this came to roost for me, where it kind of came home, was I had just gotten an email from a tutoring student of mine who is the head of his pre-law group at a school. And he was essentially inquiring to me about, like, do we ever do partnerships? Do we ever join up with pre-law groups to maybe do webinars or seminars or offer them certain discounts or features and things? And my immediate answer is, like, we do it all the time. And it's personally one of my favorite things that we do.
Mm-hmm.
We work directly with pre-law groups constantly. So if you're listening to this and you're a member of a group like that and you'd like for us to come do something with you, we are not just happy to, we're eager to. And the rewards that people, I think, get from this are enormous. It's amazing what can be accomplished to a group of like-minded individuals with the right kind of approach. And oftentimes, like I say, for free.
Yeah, and that could be that we come there in person and talk. And if not John or I, one of our instructors can do that kind of thing. They're all qualified as well. And we also can do it online. A lot of different things that we can do, set up webinars and so forth. We're a PAD partner. And PAD, if you're not familiar with it, is Phi Alpha Delta. That's the National Pre-Law Fraternity Organization. They also have a parent group that is kind of like an organization for full-fledged attorneys, kind of like a law school.
Yeah.
Fraternity relationship. Really cool organization, and we do a lot of things with them, go to their national conference and so forth. And so certainly with PAD, we do this. But if you're at a pre-law society, like close to me, there's Berkeley and there's UC Davis, those types of pre-law societies, we partner with various groups like that as well, and we can always set something up.
Yeah, we do it all the time. And like I said before, it's not only a lot of fun to do, it's really rewarding because you can see the immediate impact on this group, a fairly cohesive group of people that you can track going forward. So I love this, man. I love when we're able to do this. Don't be shy about asking us to come do something for your group. We will do it.
Yeah, and if you are thinking, maybe I will, send an email to LSAT, LSAT at PowerScore.com. and they will guide your email to the right place where they can handle that. And that brings us to the very last question of the day, Jon, and then you can get off to your movie pretty soon.
Yeah, I got a lot of cleaning up to do. This was an email to you, I think, if we're thinking of the same question here.
Yes.
All right. Do you want me to read it and then you answer it?
Yeah, why don't you do that?
Quoting from an email to Dave, and probably paraphrased a bit, but does it really matter which law school you go to, or are they all the same?
Well, they're all identical, Jon, so it's been a good podcast.
That's a wrap. All right.
And again, this was an interesting question to me because on the surface of it, you're like, no, absolutely not. They're each individual and unique, just like people. But when you think about it, I can understand what the thought process is behind this question, because the legal curriculum, especially through 1L and a good portion of the 2L years, is really the same.
Mm-hmm.
And they're all set up structurally in the same way, even if they're part-time or night programs. They're all essentially 3 years of full-time curriculum, the same core set of classes with criminal law, constitutional law, property, all this kind of stuff. And it's like, well, if you get a law degree, at the end of the day, does anybody really care if you went to Yale or whether you went to a different law school?
Right.
And a degree is a degree. It's just about crossing that bar and getting there. And I think that's why the question is generated, is like, no, they're so similar, it doesn't matter. I think that that's a really simplified way to look at things, though, is to think that just because you get the same credential, that it's the same experience. And we see this in undergraduate, is that there's, 2,000 plus undergraduate colleges and universities. They're wildly different. And law schools are exactly the same way. There may only be a tenth of that number in terms of the number of law schools, but they cater to different things. They have different outcome levels. And, physically just starting, there's a huge difference. You go to Vanderbilt and that's one experience. You go to Fordham in New York City, that's a different experience. So physically, your surroundings and what you're doing, the environment is radically different. But the most important thing to me is to look at job outcomes, because the idea of getting the credential is far and away for people to improve their professional options and careers, and to be engaged in something they find interesting that is, compensates them in a reasonable fashion, and is something that they can hopefully, aside from the times that they'll be grinding, enjoy to some extent. And so if you start looking at a school and you say to yourself, well, they're all the same, go look at job outcomes, because I think that very quickly will prove they are not all the same. There are some schools that are producing much better job outcomes, and there are some schools that are producing outcomes that are not as good. To me, that is one of the big drivers. Also, your performance at that school is not in a bubble. It's dictated by the environment around you and your comfort level. Like for me, and perhaps even for you, a school like Vanderbilt, it's in Nashville. It's really an area that I'm comfortable with. I know you're incredibly comfortable with it. You got family there, but I like the area. I like the town. I like the weather. And so for me, it would be really easy to attend that and feel good. Fordham, I like New York City quite a bit. I'm not sure I would want to live in, that kind of like the county area up there. So it would not be as attractive to me. Same thing with like NYU or Columbia. It's just a different kind of like day-to-day rhythm. So that could impact how I actually perform in law school, and that could impact my job outcomes. Would I rather be number one at Vanderbilt or, the 50th percentile or right in the middle at Columbia? I'll take number one at Vanderbilt.
Yeah, agreed with that. I'm really glad you brought that up, because to me, I think one of the easy things to overlook, this isn't a decision made solely on paper. Job outcomes and bar passage rates and what's the tuition look like and scholarships and where's it ranked in US News. This is 3 years of your life in an actual place doing stuff. That has to factor in here too. You're a human being, and whether or not that has a huge impact on performance or just on how you feel you've spent 3 years of your meager existence here, that has to matter too. I wouldn't want to go someplace that was brutally cold. I wouldn't want to go someplace that was, almost criminally boring. I couldn't go to Yale because who wants to live there?
It's not your scene?
No, it is not. So these are factors to consider as well. It's not just what the school looks like and how you think you're going to, potentially do when you get out, what are starting salaries and things, or the prestige of it. you got to take into account that you have to live there and do the day-to-day as well.
Yeah, you've got to feel comfortable. The idea that the schools are just the same because ultimately you get the same national certification, you get that Juris Doctor after your name, that to me is just, it's patently ridiculous. And you and I share a lot of similar interests in terms of like things like I don't want to go to school in someplace cold. I wouldn't really want to be at school in downtown in a city. I like a more campus environment. So if it's like in a kind of like a tall building and it turns out the law school's on floors 5 through 10, that's probably not going to be an environment that I love. If I can walk across campus to get to the school, and there's a big undergrad connected to it, I'll probably like that more. It's just, little things like that. That's just a physicality. If the physicality of where you go to law school has that kind of impact, imagine what happens when you start getting into the intellectual side. Because one of the things that you see with some of the better ranked law schools is that they have greater degree of resources. Some of these, universities like Michigan are backed by the state university system. They've got plenty of money. There's a big, beautiful campus there. Duke's a private school. I went there for undergrad, and the campus is large with a lot of cool buildings. There's not a huge undergraduate population there, but there's all sorts of other things going on, but it's more spread out. That's more my style. Someone else might be like, ridiculous. I don't want to be in Nashville or Durham or Ann Arbor for that matter. I need to be in New York, or I want to be in LA.
Yeah.
But that's just the starting point. Each of those schools have a lot of resources. It may have a greater degree of resources in some of the lower ranked schools. It's not just a like to like comparison. Yes, debt matters. And the better ranked schools tend to be fairly expensive, but all law schools are expensive. So you need to look at not just the debt that you're taking on, which we want to minimize, if not make completely zero, but also how you're going to perform there. That makes a huge difference at the end of the day because your job prospects will be directly affected by that.
Yeah. Two final comments. One that I just always kind of chuckle about, because the school that you and I tend to think about when we rank them based on our problematic lifestyles is BYU. It's always the first one we're like, don't think it'd be a good fit.
No.
But
although I like Utah and Salt Lake City is great.
Yeah. Great skiing. But keep in mind too, there's a big difference between national and regional schools. So if your future is going to possibly be tied to like a regional school, you're going to work in the area where the school is. That's just one more factor, one more criterion to consider. So there's a lot more to this than just, hey, we're all attorneys, right?
That's exactly the case. And by the way, that's not a knock on BYU.
No.
It's the fact that you sign a student covenant. And if I were to go to BYU, I would want to take that covenant seriously, but I couldn't adhere to that covenant. So it would not be a good choice for me, and I know it would not be a good choice for you. For those of you who go to BYU, it's a great school, and the financials of going to BYU are fantastic.
Yeah, it's arguably the best deal in law school.
Yeah, it really is. It's a fine deal, and if that's the kind of school that you want to go to and you like that environment, more power to you. I think it's it's not a judgment on that particular aspect of it. It's just that that's a code they want you to sign. That's not something that I think either you or I could comfortably sign and think that we would be able to adhere to it.
Yeah, it's more a judgment on ourselves and our lack of, call it impulse control.
Isn't that the truth? I'm okay with that. At this point in my life, I know who I am. So either way, but that's, you can look at all sorts of different schools and think that's in my zone, that's not in my zone, but they are not all the same. What you really want to get is that optimal outcome of this is a school that I really like and I will do well at and I'm comfortable with, and I'm also paying nothing for it if possible. We know that's the case. That's why we talk about the LSAT so much, because it has a direct impact on getting that kind of scholarship consideration. On that note, John, anything else to add?
Just to circle back to really what got us into this in the first place, which was the crystal ball discussion, a lot of the questions that we got there. We're going to continue to do these mailbag issues. So send us your questions. Don't make us wait for the next crystal ball to source requests. And how we do the next crystal ball with like the Q&A thing may be a little different too. So don't be shy. If you have questions, let us know. We will be sure to put them on a list for a future episode.
Yeah, and I think probably at the crystal ball we'll ask for questions that people have. So even though if you are planning on attending that next one, which will probably be in December.
I'm guessing early December, yeah.
Yeah, that's something to kind of add to your list. You can post that, and then we'll probably do a podcast right after it and cover these topics. But on that note, let's go ahead and call it a day. If you get a chance, please subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, or anywhere else you may find it in the world. And if you've enjoyed it, please leave us a rating and a comment as well. And if you do have any questions, you can send those to lsatpodcast@powerscore.com. That also qualifies if you're a pre-law society and you want to talk to us. You can send it to that or lsat@powerscore.com. On behalf of Jon and myself, I hope that you have enjoyed this episode. Stay safe out there, and we'll talk to you again soon.